Imagine a time when the shores of North America weren't just the home of native tribes, but a land where legendary Viking explorers set foot centuries before Columbus. What if the stories of these fearless Norsemen were more than just myths? Get ready to drift off into a world of forgotten history, where the Vikings left their mark on the Americas. And it's far more than just a tale of discovery. Fall asleep to the entire history of the Vikings in America and uncover the secrets they left behind. The Viking Age is one of the most fascinating periods in world history. It began around 800 AD and lasted for over 300 years, during which time these fierce Norsemen from Scandinavia changed the course of history. But what really sets them apart is their exploration beyond the lands they knew. While many people associate the Vikings with raiding, pillaging, and conquering, they were also skilled navigators, traders, and explorers. It was their adventurous spirit that led them far across the seas, eventually bringing them to the shores of North America long before any other Europeans. Most people don't know that the Vikings reached the Americas nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus. The story of their journey to the New World is both thrilling and mysterious. The Viking saga is filled with daring adventures across the ocean, uncovering new lands, battling harsh conditions, and encountering the unknown. But how did this all start? Why did the Vikings, often seen as brutal warriors, venture so far from their homeland? It all began in the rugged fjords and icy lands of Scandinavia, where the Vikings developed the remarkable skills that would make them some of the best sailors in history. Their long ships, built for speed and agility, allowed them to sail across rough seas and navigate rivers with incredible precision. This ability to travel vast distances was what made their expeditions possible. However, their journey to America wasn't a simple voyage. It was driven by curiosity, survival, and the urge to expand their horizons. The Vikings' first recorded trip to the Americas was led by Leif Erikson, a son of the famous explorer Eric the Red, around the year 1000 AD. Erikson sailed west from Greenland and arrived on the shores of what is now Newfoundland, Canada. Named this new land Vinland due to the abundance of wild grapes he found there. The discovery of Vinland is one of the most significant moments in Viking exploration, but it remains a topic of debate among historians. Did the Vikings really reach the Americas, or was it just a myth passed down through the centuries? What we do know is that the Vikings were no strangers to adventure and discovery. They had already traveled as far as the Middle East and Africa, traded with the Byzantine Empire, and even raided parts of England and France. Their voyages to the Americas were just another chapter in their long history of pushing the boundaries of the known world. The question remains, what did they find in the New World? Were they the first Europeans to set foot on North American soil? And if so, what impact did their arrival have? This story begins with a young Viking adventurer who dared to sail across the unknown. But the journey was only the beginning. To truly understand the Vikings in America, we must explore the challenges they faced, the settlements they built, and the mysteries that still linger in the land they called Vinland. As we explore these tales, you'll realize just how far ahead of their time these explorers truly were. Their journey wasn't just about discovery, it was about understanding the world beyond their shores and the bravery it took to set sail into the vast unknown. Now, as you start to drift into a peaceful sleep, imagine the waves crashing against the Viking ships as they ventured towards a new world. It was a journey of both wonder and danger, and the Vikings' legacy in America is a tale worth remembering. Leif Erikson is perhaps the most famous Viking explorer, and his journey to North America marks one of the most incredible feats of exploration in history. Born around 970 AD in Iceland, Leif was the son of Eric the Red, another legendary Viking figure who founded the first Norse settlement in Greenland. Leif grew up hearing stories of far-off lands and adventures, and like many Vikings, he felt a pull to explore the unknown. However, what set him apart was his ability to not only dream of these places, but to actually set sail and discover them. Around the year 1000 AD, Leif Erikson set out from Greenland, bound for a land that had been hinted at by tales of sailors who had traveled even farther west. It was these stories, whispers of fertile lands filled with resources and vast forests, that motivated Leif to take the boldest step of his life. As a skilled sailor, Leif wasn't afraid to venture into uncharted waters. His father, Eric the Red, had established a settlement in Greenland. But now, it was Leif's turn to expand the horizons of their people. Leif's journey took him across the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic. After several weeks at sea, Leif and his crew arrived on the shores of what is now known as Newfoundland, Canada. To Leif, it seemed like a land full of opportunity. With its forests, rivers, and wild grapes, was vastly different from the icy lands of Greenland. And so he named it Vinland, meaning land of wine or land of grapes. While the exact reason behind this name is debated, some believe it was because of the grapes he found. Others argue it could be a reference to a wild vine-like plant. The discovery marked a significant moment in Viking exploration. But Leif's arrival in Vinland wasn't just about finding a beautiful new land. It was about creating a lasting legacy. Upon arrival, Leif and his crew spent the winter in this new land, building temporary shelters. What followed was a series of events that would become legendary in Viking history. The Vikings came into contact with the indigenous people of the area, most likely the ancestors of the Beathic people. While initial interactions may have been peaceful, tensions quickly escalated, leading to conflicts that would shape the Vikings' experience in North America. Leif's journey to Vinland was not a one-time event. He later returned to Greenland, bringing back tales of the new land and its potential. His discovery captured the imagination of many Norsemen, and soon, other expeditions were launched to further explore the possibilities that Vinland offered. Leif's brother Thorvald Eriksson even set out to continue his exploration of the land. However, his journey ended tragically when he was killed by an arrow shot by the indigenous people. Despite the hardships and dangers, the Norsemen's encounters in Vinland would continue to echo through the centuries, creating a mysterious chapter in history that has intrigued historians and adventurers alike. The mystery of why the Vikings abandoned Vinland remains unsolved. Was it the harsh climate, conflicts with indigenous people, or did they simply lose interest after several years of trying to settle the land? Some theories suggest that the Vikings returned to Greenland or Iceland due to internal struggles and the difficulty of maintaining a colony in the harsh wilderness of North America. While the Vikings did not leave behind permanent settlements in Vinland, their brief but significant presence in North America is an important chapter in both Viking history and the early exploration of the Americas. It raises questions about how far they truly ventured, what they encountered, and what impact they had on the lands they briefly inhabited. As you slowly begin to drift deeper into sleep, picture the Viking longships, their sails billowing in the wind as they approach the shores of Vinland. Imagine the crew, filled with hope and determination, stepping onto the strange new land. What they found was a world both wild and beautiful, a world that would leave its mark on Viking history forever. The arrival of Leif Erikson and his crew in Vinland was not just about exploration, it was the beginning of what could have been a lasting Viking presence in North America. But despite the initial excitement and optimism, their attempts to settle in the new land were short-lived. The Vikings, known for their bravery in battle and skill in sailing, found that establishing a colony in Vinland was much more difficult than they had anticipated. After their first winter in Vinland, the Vikings decided to make this new land their home. They built temporary shelters and started exploring their surroundings. The forests were filled with resources, and the rivers and coasts offered opportunities for fishing and hunting. The land seemed to promise a bountiful future for the Vikings, and there was talk of establishing a permanent settlement. For a time, it seemed as though Vinland could become a thriving colony, adding another chapter to the Vikings' growing empire across the world. However, the challenges of life in this new land soon became apparent. The weather in Vinland was harsher than expected. Winters were cold and long, making survival difficult, especially for a group of settlers not used to the extreme cold and isolation of the region. Food resources, while abundant in the summer, became scarce during the winter months, and the Vikings were forced to rely heavily on what they could bring with them or trade with the indigenous people. The relationship with the native people of the region, the ancestors of the Beathic, was another major factor in the Vikings. Dolls. Initially, interactions between the Vikings and the indigenous people were relatively peaceful. The Vikings traded goods with the natives, including iron tools and weapons for furs, food, and other resources. However, as time passed, tensions began to rise. The Vikings were warriors at heart, and the indigenous people, likely wary of the newcomers, began to view them with suspicion. The initial peace turned into hostility, leading to skirmishes between the two groups. In one notable incident, Leif's brother, Thorvald Eriksson, was killed by an arrow shot by the native people while exploring the area. This marked a turning point in the Viking settlement, as the violence escalated. Despite these challenges, the Vikings did not immediately abandon Vinland. They continued to explore the area and try to establish a more permanent presence. However, after several years of fighting with the indigenous people, struggling to survive in the harsh environment, and dealing with the isolation of their settlement, the Norsemen were forced to make a difficult decision. The final blow came when the Vikings decided to abandon Vinland altogether. The reasons behind this abandonment remain unclear, but it is widely believed that a combination of factors led to the decision. The brutal winters, the conflicts with the indigenous tribes, and the lack of resources made it impossible for the Vikings to maintain a permanent settlement. The idea of Vinland as a thriving Norse colony was abandoned, and the Vikings returned to Greenland and Iceland. But even though the Vikings did not succeed in establishing a lasting settlement in Vinland, their brief stay left a lasting impact. The legacy of their exploration would continue to echo through history. Their journey to the Americas challenged the conventional narrative of European exploration and demonstrated the Viking spirit of adventure and bravery. As you drift into a peaceful sleep, think of the Vikings packing up their ships, leaving behind the land they once believed could be their new home. Imagine them sailing back across the icy waters of the North Atlantic, with the memory of Vinland forever etched in their minds. It was a chapter that was short but meaningful, a testament to their courage and their desire to explore the unknown. For centuries, historians and archaeologists have debated the reasons why the Vikings, who were so successful in their other ventures, chose to leave a land that seemed to hold so much promise. One of the most widely accepted theories centers around the constant conflicts between the Vikings and the indigenous peoples of North America. While the initial interactions between the two groups were relatively peaceful, tensions soon escalated. The murder of Thorvald Eriksson, Leif's brother, by an indigenous warrior further heightened these tensions. After Thorvald's death, it is said that the Vikings retaliated, leading to more violence and conflict. The Vikings were used to conquering lands and imposing their own way of life. However, the situation in Vinland was different. The indigenous people, unlike the relatively easier targets of European territories, were formidable in their own right. The combination of hostility from the native tribes and the isolation of the settlement could have made life in Vinland more dangerous than the Vikings had anticipated. Another key factor that likely played a role in the abandonment of Vinland was the harsh climate. The frigid temperatures, coupled with the scarcity of food during the winter months, would have made survival extremely challenging. The Vikings may have simply been unable to adapt to the environmental conditions. Additionally, the Vikings' dependence on the sea for food, trade, and supplies could have been a double-edged sword. While their ships were remarkable for their time, sailing in the North Atlantic was no easy feat. The Vikings would have had to contend with dangerous weather patterns, long journeys for trade, and the difficulty of maintaining supply routes to Vinland. Over time, it is possible that the logistical challenges of sustaining a colony in the Americas became overwhelming, leading the Vikings to reconsider their settlement. It was possible that they were not as committed to establishing a permanent settlement as we might think. The Viking culture was one of constant exploration and expansion. And once the Norsemen had explored the land and briefly established their presence, they may have moved on to other ventures. Yet, despite all of these challenges, it is clear that the Vikings' exploration of Vinland was not a failure in the traditional sense. While they did not establish a lasting colony, their journeys helped map out a portion of North America long before Columbus. As you continue to drift into a deep sleep, consider the uncertainty that surrounds the Vikings' departure from Vinland. Imagine them staring out at the vast ocean, contemplating their next move. The story of their time in the Americas remains an enigma, one of many in the history of exploration. And as the Vikings sailed back to Greenland, they carried with them the secrets of a land that few would know about for centuries to come. Though the Vikings were the first known Europeans to set foot on North American soil, their time in the New World was relatively brief, and their settlement in Vinland was ultimately abandoned. However, their legacy in North America is far-reaching and played a significant role in shaping the SDOs of future exploration in history. The impact of their voyages resonates even today, centuries after their departure from the Americas. The most immediate legacy of the Vikings' journey to North America lies in their pioneering role as explorers. The Vikings were the first Europeans to make significant contact with the Americas, and their voyages were more than just short-term expeditions. They left behind a trail of discovery that would inspire future generations of explorers to search for new lands and push the boundaries of the known world. For centuries, stories of the Vikings' journey to Vinland were told and retold, eventually becoming part of the fabric of European myth and legend. While the Vikings may not have established lasting colonies in North America, their expeditions provided valuable information about the New World. Their encounters with indigenous peoples and their exploration of the coastline likely helped shape early European understanding of the Americas. Even though their settlements were abandoned, their voyages helped prove that North America was a land worth exploring, a sentiment that would resurface centuries later during the Age of Exploration. It wasn't until the late 15th century, with Christopher Columbus's famous voyage in 1492, that Europe once again turned its attention to the Americas. However, Columbus's journey, as monumental as it was, would not have been possible without the groundwork laid by earlier explorers like the Vikings. Columbus himself likely knew of Viking tales of the New World, and may have been inspired by the stories of the mysterious Vinland. The Vikings' legacy also extended to the way in which later explorers approached their expeditions. The Vikings were skilled seafarers, using advanced shipbuilding techniques that enabled them to navigate the open ocean and explore distant lands. Their long ships, designed for both speed and versatility, were ideal for both raiding and exploration. These ships became a symbol of Viking mastery over the seas and would inspire the design of future ships that made European exploration of the Americas possible. Another aspect of the Vikings' legacy lies in their interactions with indigenous peoples. The Vikings' brief presence in North America likely influenced future European attitudes toward native populations. While the Vikings did engage in trade with the indigenous peoples they encountered, their relationships were also marked by conflict and violence. This pattern would unfortunately continue throughout the history of European colonization. As later explorers and settlers often treated native populations with hostility, the Vikings' early encounters with the indigenous peoples of the Americas set a precedent for future European settlers, who would go on to impact native cultures in profound and often destructive ways. Archaeological discoveries also serve as a testament to the Vikings' presence in North America. In the 1960s, an excavation at L'Anse aux Meadows, located in Newfoundland, Canada, revealed the remains of a Norse settlement that is widely believed to be the very Vinland described in the sagas. This discovery provided concrete evidence that the Vikings had indeed reached the Americas decades before Columbus. The site remains one of the most important archaeological sites for understanding Viking exploration and settlement in North America. In addition to the archaeological evidence, the Viking sagas themselves are a valuable source of information. These ancient stories, passed down through generations, contain references to the Vikings' voyages to North America. While the sagas are sometimes filled with myth and legend, they also provide clues about the Vikings' interactions with the land, the people, and the challenges they faced. These sagas have helped historians piece together the story of the Vikings in America and continue to spark curiosity, debate among scholars. Even though the Vikings did not establish a permanent presence in North America, their exploration had a lasting impact on both history and the imagination. They were the first Europeans to venture across the vast Atlantic, proving that the world beyond Europe was open to exploration. Their legacy lives on, not only in the history books, but in the very spirit of exploration that continues to inspire adventurers and explorers to this day. As you relax and drift further into sleep, consider the Vikings' enduring influence on the world. Their courage, curiosity, and sense of adventure sparked a movement that would shape the future of exploration for centuries. While their journey to the Americas may have been brief, their impact on history is immeasurable, and their legacy will continue to inspire the world's explorers for generations to come. One of the most enduring aspects of the Viking presence in North America is the rich tapestry of stories and sagas that have been passed down through generations. These tales, filled with gods, monsters, and heroic figures, not only provide insight into Viking culture, but also offer a glimpse into how they viewed their world, their travels, and their place in history. While the Vikings' historical record is sparse, their mythology and sagas serve as an essential tool for understanding their mindset and the legacy they left behind. The Viking sagas, written in Old Norse, were epic tales that recounted the adventures of legendary figures like Ragnar Lothbrok, Eric the Red, and Leif Erikson. These sagas were often a mix of history and legend, blending real events with mythical elements to create stories that were both thrilling and meaningful. The saga of Leif Erikson's voyage to Vinland, for example, is a combination of historical facts and the kind of heroic storytelling that defined Viking culture. In these sagas, Leif is portrayed not only as an explorer, but as a fearless adventurer destined to leave his mark on the world. The Viking sagas were more than just entertainment. They were a way of preserving history, values, and traditions. The tales were passed orally from one generation to the next, and later written down in medieval Iceland. These stories were a reflection of the Vikings' belief in fate, their reverence for nature, and their connection to the sea. The Vikings believed that their lives were guided by the gods, and many of the sagas include divine intervention in the lives of heroes, turning battles, and deciding the fate of nations. In addition to the heroic sagas, the Vikings also had tales of mythological creatures and supernatural events. These stories often blended with the Vikings' real-world experiences. For instance, the saga of Vinland might include fantastical elements, like encounters with mythical beasts or interactions with gods, which were common in Viking storytelling. While these fantastical elements cannot be taken literally, they serve to make the journey to the unknown world of North America more mystical and significant. The Tenamen Alpa Ab with the Ontai, where I said the fourth Bible, and what a minute, well, I'm telling what we're for red, my race, with for and for an for fellow to Roman, and bill, and one of the most significant contributions of Viking mythology to the narrative of their travels to the Americas is the emphasis on exploration and discovery. The Vikings believed that it was their destiny to venture into new lands, even if those lands were dangerous or unknown. The journey to Vinland, as described in the sagas, was not just a physical voyage, it was a journey that was deeply spiritual and tied to the Vikings' beliefs in fate, adventure, and the will of the gods. The gods were often portrayed as both protectors and adversaries, guiding and challenging the heroes as they ventured into new territories. The Vikings' mythology also included their belief in the afterlife. The idea of the Valhalla, the Hall of Slain Warriors, was central to Viking culture. For the Vikings, the afterlife was not just about peace and rest, it was a continuation of the battle. They believed that if they died bravely in battle, they would be chosen by the gods and taken to Valhalla, where they would fight and feast for all eternity. This belief in a warrior's honor and fate influenced their worldview, and it's reflected in the bravery and fearlessness of Viking explorers like Leif Erikson. Their travels were not just about discovery. They were a test of strength, courage, and destiny. In the context of Vinland, the Vikings' mythology and sagas helped to elevate their discoveries to legendary status. The land they found was not just a new territory, it was a place where gods might walk, where heroes might fight, and where fate could be shaped. Even though the Vikings didn't establish a lasting settlement in North America, the sagas imbued their voyages with a sense of purpose and meaning. The tales of their journeys became part of the larger mythological narrative of the Vikings, preserving their adventurous spirit for generations. As we continue to explore the Vikings' impact on North America, it's important to remember that their journey was more than just a historical event, it was a story woven into the fabric of Viking identity. The sagas, filled with gods, heroes, and far-off lands, not only tell us about the Vikings' travels, but also give us insight into their souls. They were a people driven by a sense of destiny, and their stories continue to captivate us today. Now, as you begin to drift deeper into sleep, imagine the Vikings setting sail once more, the winds carrying them across the ocean. Picture the mythical world they believed in: the gods, the monsters, and the challenges that lay ahead. The Vikings were not just explorers of new lands. They were adventurers in a world of myths, guided by fate and driven by a thirst for discovery. And in their minds, Vinland was not just a place, it was a story that would live on forever. While Viking sagas and myths provide rich stories of adventure and exploration, it is through archaeology that we have been able to uncover the most tangible evidence of their presence in North America. For centuries, historians and archaeologists relied primarily on written accounts. But these were often scattered, and some were exaggerated. However, in the 20th century, groundbreaking archaeological discoveries provided us with concrete proof that the Vikings indeed set foot on the shores of North America long before Columbus. One of the most significant discoveries came in 1960, when an archaeological site was unearthed at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. This site, located at the northernmost tip of Newfoundland, is now widely regarded as the first authenticated Viking settlement in North America. The discovery of L'Anse aux Meadows was a game-changer in Viking history, as it provided undeniable evidence that the Norsemen had indeed arrived in the Americas around 1000 AD. L'Anse aux Meadows is a complex of Norse-style buildings that include longhouses, workshops, and a forge. The construction of these structures mirrors the types of buildings found in Viking settlements in Greenland and Iceland, with turf roofs and walls made of wood. These structures, though in ruins today, provided clear evidence that the Vikings had established a temporary settlement in the region, likely for the purpose of exploration, trade, and possibly resource gathering. Archaeologists have even uncovered iron nails, tools, and other artifacts that were characteristic of Viking craftsmanship. One of the most fascinating aspects of the L'Anse aux Meadows site is the discovery of remnants of Viking artifacts. These include items such as spindle whorls, a piece of a Viking-style soapstone vessel, and a number of iron tools. These tools, including nails and rivets, suggest that the Vikings were not just visiting the region they were building, crafting, and attempting to create a sustainable presence. The presence of iron tools is particularly important, as it shows that the Norsemen were not simply relying on the resources they found in the wild. Instead, they were bringing their own advanced technology with them, a hallmark of Viking exploration and innovation. In addition to these tangible artifacts, the site at L'Anse aux Meadows also provides evidence of the Vikings' interactions with the indigenous peoples of the area. The location itself suggests that the Vikings were not merely passing through, were staying in the area long enough to engage in trade or potentially conflicts with local tribes. While the archaeological record does not provide a complete picture of these interactions, it is clear that the Vikings were not isolated in their exploration. They were part of a larger network of global trade and exchange, reaching out across the Atlantic to establish contact with other cultures. Though L'Anse aux Meadows is the most significant Viking site discovered in North America, it is not the only one. Other sites have been suggested as potential Viking locations, though these have not been as thoroughly excavated or verified. The evidence at these other locations is often less conclusive, with some archaeologists debating whether the findings truly indicate Viking presence or are simply coincidental. However, the discoveries at L'Anse aux Meadows provide a strong case for the idea that the Vikings did indeed make more than just a brief, accidental visit to North America. One of the key challenges in studying Viking presence in North America is the lack of written records. While the sagas provide valuable insights into the Vikings' travels, they often blur the line between myth and reality, making it difficult to separate fact from fiction. The archaeological evidence, however, offers a more grounded view of their time in the Americas, providing us with a clearer picture of the Vikings' role in shaping early North American history. As you settle deeper into sleep, imagine the Viking explorers arriving at L'Anse aux Meadows, their longships cutting through the waters as they approach the shore. Picture them stepping onto the land, their iron tools and weapons gleaming in the sunlight as they begin to build and explore. Their settlement was small, temporary, and eventually abandoned. But the artifacts they left behind serve as a powerful reminder of their journey, a journey that continues to captivate historians and adventurers alike. Through the lens of archaeology, we are able to peer into the past and uncover the stories of those who came before us. And while the full extent of Viking exploration in North America may never be fully understood, the discoveries at Lonzo Meadows remind us that the Vikings' presence in the New World was not just a myth, it was a reality. The Vikings' brief presence in North America wasn't just a milestone in European exploration. It also marked one of the first major encounters between European explorers and the indigenous peoples of the Americas. These encounters, while not extensively documented, had a profound impact on both the Vikings and the native populations. Understanding this interaction is crucial to appreciating the complexity of Viking exploration in the New World. When Leif Erikson and his crew landed on the shores of what they called Vinland, they encountered the indigenous peoples who lived in the region. These early interactions were likely with the ancestors of the Beothuk people, though it is possible that other groups, such as the Micmac, also came into contact with the Vikings. The Vikings were seasoned explorers. They were also unfamiliar with the cultures and social structures of the indigenous populations they encountered. The first interactions between the two groups were likely peaceful. The Vikings, known for their trading networks, would have been keen to establish relationships with the native people for mutual benefit. Archaeological evidence from sites like Lonzo Meadows suggests that the Vikings may have traded with the indigenous peoples, exchanging iron tools, weapons, and other European goods for furs, food, and knowledge of the land. This type of trade would have been beneficial for both sides. The Vikings needed resources to survive in the harsh environment, and the indigenous peoples could have gained access to items they had not previously encountered, such as iron tools and weapons. However, as time went on, tensions began to rise. The Vikings were a warrior culture, accustomed to taking what they wanted through force if necessary. The indigenous peoples, on the other hand, had a deep connection to the land and a different way of life. While initial encounters may have been friendly, the Vikings' aggressive tendencies and their need to control the land likely led to friction. As the Vikings expanded their presence in the region, the indigenous groups may have felt threatened by these foreign invaders, and their attempts to establish a foothold in what had been their land for generations. One of the most significant events that may have escalated tensions was the death of Thorvald Eriksson, Leif's brother. According to the sagas, Thorvald was killed by an arrow shot by an indigenous warrior while exploring Vinland. This death marked a turning point in the Vikings' interactions with the native peoples. The Vikings, driven by their warrior ethos, likely retaliated, which could have further deepened hostilities. The violence and conflict between the Vikings and the indigenous peoples may have contributed to the eventual abandonment of Vinland by the Norsemen. Despite these conflicts, it is important to note that the Viking encounters with the indigenous populations of North America were relatively brief. Unlike later European colonization efforts, which led to prolonged conflicts and the displacement of indigenous peoples, the Viking presence in the Americas was short-lived. The Vikings did not establish permanent settlements or significantly alter the cultures of the native populations. Their impact was limited, but their brief interactions set a precedent for future European explorers, who would later arrive in the Americas, bringing with them a different set of intentions and ambitions. The Vikings' interactions with the indigenous peoples also highlight the complex nature of early European exploration. The Vikings, while aggressive and expansionist, were also pragmatic and often sought peaceful solutions through trade. Their time in North America was shaped by both cooperation and conflict. And these early encounters were a microcosm of the larger issues that would arise as European powers continued to explore and colonize the Americas. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the Vikings coming ashore in Vinland, their longships anchored in the shallow waters as they meet the native peoples for the first time. Picture the exchange of goods, the tentative conversations, and the eventual conflict that would change the course of history. The Vikings, with their swords and shields, were but one chapter in the long and complex story of European exploration in the Americas. And though their time in the New World was brief, their impact on the indigenous peoples and the future of the continent would echo for centuries to come. After several years of exploration, trade, and conflict in Vinland, the Vikings eventually abandoned their brief settlement and sailed back to Greenland. Their departure from the New World marked the end of their attempts to colonize North America. But it was also the beginning of another chapter in their history, one that would bring them back to the familiar shores of Greenland where they had originally come from. The decision to leave Vinland was not made lightly. The harsh winters, lack of resources, increasing hostility from the indigenous peoples made life in the New World increasingly difficult for the Vikings. While the land was rich with resources and the potential for trade, it was far too isolated and dangerous for a permanent settlement. The initial excitement of discovering new lands gradually faded as the reality of survival set in. The Vikings, after all, were not just explorers, they were also warriors and settlers. Establishing a successful colony required more than just curiosity and bravery. It required sustainability, peace, and a stable supply of food and materials. The journey back to Greenland was not an easy one. The Vikings had to sail across the vast and unpredictable waters of the North Atlantic, facing treacherous weather conditions and unpredictable currents. These long voyages were dangerous, even for the experienced Viking sailors. But returning to Greenland was not just a physical journey, it was a return to their roots. Greenland, though harsh and remote, was familiar and provided a stable environment for the Vikings. They had already established settlements there. It was a place where they could regroup and reconsider their next steps. Upon their return, the Vikings brought with them stories of the new world, of the land they had called Vinland, the people they had encountered, and the challenges they had faced. These tales became part of the Viking sagas, stories that would be passed down through generations. Although the settlement in Vinland was abandoned, its memory lived on in the sagas, inspiring future generations to continue the exploration of the Americas. Leif Erikson, Thorvald Eriksson, and the other Vikings who made the journey to North America became legendary figures in Viking lore. Their names would be remembered for centuries to come. While the Vikings did not return to Vinland, their voyages laid the groundwork for future exploration. Their brief presence in the Americas demonstrated that it was possible to sail across the Atlantic and reach the shores of North America. Their voyages, though short-lived, proved that there was a world beyond Europa, a world filled with untapped resources, unknown peoples, and vast possibilities. The decision to leave Vinland may have been influenced by several factors: difficult relationships with the indigenous peoples of the region, the challenges of adapting to a new environment, and the logistical difficulties of sustaining a settlement so far from home were all significant obstacles. But it's also possible that the Vikings simply lost interest in establishing a permanent colony in the New World. They were, after all, a people driven by adventure and exploration, and the discovery of Vinland was just one of many chapters in their long history of expansion. As the Vikings sailed back to Greenland, they left behind a land that was rich with potential, but ultimately too distant and difficult to maintain. The memory of Vinland would fade with time, but the impact of the Vikings' exploration would not be forgotten. Their voyages marked the beginning of the larger European exploration of the Americas, a movement that would take centuries to unfold. As you close your eyes and relax into a peaceful sleep, imagine the Vikings sailing away from Vinland, their ships cutting through the icy waters as they head back to familiar shores. The land they had discovered would remain a mystery for centuries to come, but the spirit of exploration that they embodied would continue to inspire adventurers and explorers for generations. The Vikings had come to the New World, but their legacy would live on, inspiring those who would follow in their wake. While the Vikings' time in North America was brief, their exploration of Vinland left a lasting legacy, one that would inspire future European expeditions. The Vikings were the first Europeans to reach North America, predating Christopher Columbus by nearly 500 years. Their voyages, though short-lived, opened the door for the age of exploration and played a significant role in shaping the European worldview of the New World. The Vikings' expeditions to Vinland were motivated by a desire to expand their influence, find new resources, and discover new lands. These motivations were not unlike those of later explorers, including Columbus, who would eventually discover the Americas in 1492. The Viking explorations, while overshadowed by the more famous voyages of the 15th and 16th centuries, laid the groundwork for the European colonization of the Americas. In many ways, the Vikings were pioneers, showing that crossing the Atlantic and reaching the New World was possible. The legacy of the Vikings' voyages can be seen in the way later explorers approached their own expeditions. Columbus, for example, had heard stories of the Norse voyages to the Americas, though he did not base his own journey directly on them. However, the idea that there were lands across the Atlantic was firmly planted in European minds, and the Vikings' presence in the New World, although largely forgotten for centuries, sparked the curiosity that eventually led to the great explorations of the 15th century. It is also important to note that the Vikings' experience in North America would have given them valuable lessons about navigating the Atlantic Ocean. Their ships, the famous longships, were uniquely designed for exploration, capable of both sailing across open seas and navigating shallow rivers. These vessels were crucial in the Vikings' ability to explore far beyond their homeland. Their skills in navigation and shipbuilding set the stage for later explorers, who adopted similar techniques in their own journeys across the ocean. Moreover, the Vikings' success in establishing temporary settlements in North America proved that it was possible to survive and thrive in the harsh conditions of the New World. While the Vikings did not succeed in founding permanent colonies, their ability to explore, trade, and engage with the indigenous peoples was an important step in proving that Europe's reach could extend across the Atlantic. Interestingly, the Vikings' exploration of Vinland also had a lasting impact on the way Europeans viewed indigenous cultures. While relations between the Vikings and the native peoples of North America were fraught with conflict, there was also trade and exchange of knowledge. So Vikings' ability to learn from and interact with the indigenous peoples set a precedent for the later European colonizers, who would bring with them not only settlers but also new diseases, technologies, and trade goods that would forever alter the Americas. In the centuries following the Viking voyages, the memory of their discovery of Vinland faded into legend. For a long time, the world would forget that the Vikings were the first Europeans to set foot in the New World. However, their impact on history was undeniable. Their exploration inspired the great navigators of the Renaissance, like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan, who followed in the Vikings' wake and forever changed the world. As you drift into a peaceful sleep, imagine the longships setting sail once again, carrying adventurers across the ocean to unknown lands. The Vikings had opened the way for future explorers, and their journeys marked the beginning of a new age of discovery. Though their time in the New World was brief, their legacy would continue to shape the course of history for centuries to come. The Vikings' brief time in North America may have been overshadowed by later explorers, but their stories have lived on through the sagas, the epic tales passed down orally from one generation to the next. These sagas, filled with myth, history, and adventure, are a crucial part of Viking culture and offer a unique perspective on their travels to the New World. In this section, we explore the role of these sagas in preserving Viking history and how they helped shape the narrative of the Viking discovery of America. The Viking sagas are some of the most important literary works to have survived from the Middle Ages. Written in Old Norse, these sagas were not just tales of adventure, but also a way to preserve the history and values of Viking society. They were passed down orally from one generation to the next by skilled storytellers known as skalds. These oral traditions were an essential part of Viking life, and it was through them that the Vikings preserved their history, heroism, and accomplishments. Among the most famous of these sagas is the Saga of the Greenlanders, which recounts the story of Leif Erikson's voyage to Vinland. It, as well as the Saga of Eric the Red, which tells the story of Eric the Red's settlement of Greenland and the journey of his son, Leif. These sagas provide a wealth of information about the Vikings' voyages to North America, including their interactions with indigenous peoples, the challenges they faced, and the dramatic events that unfolded during their time in Vinland. The sagas are a unique blend of history and myth. While they contain many historical facts, they are also filled with legendary elements that reflect the Vikings' worldview. The sagas depict the Vikings as heroic figures, fearless adventurers, skilled warriors, and intrepid explorers. Their travels to Vinland were not merely journeys across the ocean. They were heroic quests, filled with challenges, battles, and encounters with mystical creatures and gods. These larger-than-life portrayals helped shape the image of the Vikings as legendary figures, and their story became entwined with myth, The importance of oral tradition in Viking society cannot be overstated. In a time before written records were common, the skalds who told these sagas played a crucial role in preserving the history of the Vikings. They were the historians, poets, and entertainers of their time, and through their art, they ensured that the stories of the Vikings' travels, achievements, and heroes would not be forgotten. These sagas helped to solidify the Viking identity and pass on their values to future generations. However, while the sagas provide us with invaluable insight into Viking history, they must be read with a degree of caution. Since they were passed down orally for centuries before being written down, the sagas are a mixture of fact and fiction. Over time, the stories were embellished, and details may have been altered or exaggerated. For example, the saga of the Greenlanders describes Vinland as a land filled with wild grapes. But historians debate whether this was a literal description or a symbolic element meant to enhance the narrative. Despite the mythical elements, the sagas remain our best source of information about the Vikings' presence in North America. The sagas also tell us a great deal about Viking culture and their motivations. The Vikings were not just warriors, they were also traders, settlers, and explorers. Driven by a desire to expand their horizons and discover new lands, the Vikings' journeys to Vinland were part of a broader pattern of exploration that saw them travel as far as the Middle East, Russia, and North Africa. The sagas reflect the Vikings' belief in fate and destiny, which guided their journeys and shaped their view of the world. In addition to providing a historical record of Viking exploration, the sagas also served a cultural purpose. They were meant to inspire and entertain, celebrating the Viking ideals of bravery, honor, and exploration. These stories were often recited at feasts and gatherings, reinforcing the values of Viking society and reminding the people of their heroic past. The sagas helped to create a sense of shared identity among the Vikings and contributed to the enduring legacy of their culture. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the sounds of a skald reciting the saga of Leif Erikson, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the story. Picture the Vikings sitting around a roaring fire, listening intently as the tale of their ancestors unfolds. The sagas kept the memory of their voyages to Vinland alive, ensuring that the legacy of the Vikings would continue to inspire future generations. Though their time in the New World was brief, the Vikings' adventures live on in the stories that have been passed down through the centuries. Though the Vikings' brief presence in North America was largely forgotten for centuries, the rediscovery of their legacy in the modern era has sparked renewed interest in their voyages. For a long time, historians dismissed the idea of Viking exploration in the Americas as mere legend. But as archaeological evidence emerged and new discoveries were made, the story of the Vikings' journey to the New World was brought back into the spotlight. In this section, we'll explore how modern historians and archaeologists have uncovered the forgotten history of the Vikings in North America and why it matters today. The rediscovery of Viking America began in earnest in the 1960s, when a remarkable archaeological site was uncovered in Newfoundland, Canada. L'Anse aux Meadows, a site dating back to around 1000 AD, is identified as a Norse settlement, providing tangible evidence that the Vikings had indeed reached the Americas centuries before Columbus. The site consists of a series of Viking-style buildings, including longhouses and workshops, which were remarkably similar to those found in Greenland and Iceland. This discovery was a game-changer, confirming that the Vikings had not only visited North America, but had also attempted to settle there. The excavation of L'Anse aux Meadows revealed a treasure trove of artifacts, including iron nails, tools, and pottery, all of which pointed to a Viking presence in the region. One of the most fascinating aspects of the site is the evidence of Viking craftsmanship. The tools and materials found at the site were consistent with the types of equipment used by the Norsemen in their other settlements, reinforcing the idea that they had established a functional, albeit temporary, colony in North America. The discovery of L'Anse aux Meadows reignited interest in the Viking voyages and brought the historical significance of their presence in the Americas back into the public consciousness. In the years following the excavation, historians and archaeologists began to reassess the role of the Vikings in the history of exploration. Many scholars started to recognize that the Vikings' journey to the Americas was not just a brief failed attempt at colonization. It was an important chapter in the broader story of European exploration, even if it was overshadowed by later voyages like those of Columbus. In addition to Lonso Meadows, further evidence of Viking exploration has surfaced in other parts of North America. In the 1970s and 1980s, artifacts such as Viking coins, metalwork, green stones were found in various locations along the eastern seaboard of the United States. While these discoveries are still debated by some historians, they further support the idea that the Vikings may have traveled further into the Americas than previously thought. Some even suggest that the Vikings might have reached as far south as the Gulf of Mexico or even the Great Lakes, though these theories remain speculative. In recent years, the field of Viking archaeology has continued to evolve. New technologies such as ground-penetrating radar and DNA analysis helping to uncover even more about the Vikings. Activities in North America. For example, researchers are using genetic testing to trace the Viking presence in the Americas, looking for evidence of Viking ancestry among modern indigenous populations. These efforts are not only uncovering the history of the Vikings in North America, but also shedding light on the complex interactions between the Vikings and the indigenous peoples they encountered. The rediscovery of Viking America has also sparked a renewed interest in Viking culture and history. In popular culture, the Vikings have been portrayed as fierce warriors, explorers, and adventurers, and their legacy has become a source of fascination for people all over the world. The stories of Leif Erikson and his fellow explorers have inspired books, documentaries, films, and television series, further cementing the Vikings' place in the pantheon of legendary figures. Today, their voyages to the Americas are often celebrated as a testament to their spirit of exploration and their role in shaping the course of history. As you drift off into a deep sleep, imagine the excitement of modern-day archaeologists as they uncover the remnants of Viking longhouses. Their tools and artifacts buried for centuries beneath the earth. Picture the wonder and curiosity that must have filled the minds of the researchers as they realized they were unearthing the forgotten legacy of the first Europeans to reach the Americas. The Vikings' story, once lost to time, has been rediscovered, and their legacy will continue to inspire explorers, historians, and dreamers for generations to come. The Viking legacy, particularly their exploration of North America, continues to captivate the modern imagination. From movies and television shows to books and video games, the Vikings have become one of the most iconic cultures in the world, known for their daring voyages, powerful warriors, and mythic stories. But why does the Viking narrative remain so compelling today? The answer lies in their unique combination of bravery, adventure, and mystique, which resonates deeply with our modern sense of exploration and the unknown. Vikings are often portrayed as fierce, rugged individuals with a deep sense of loyalty, honor, and independence. This image has been popularized in films and television series like Vikings and The Last Kingdom, which depict their culture in ways that appeal to modern audiences. The Vikings' historical narrative is a perfect blend of fact and legend, with their real-world exploration of distant lands mixing seamlessly with the mythological tales of gods and monsters. This fusion of reality and fantasy makes the Vikings not only relatable, but also larger-than-life figures that seem to defy time and space. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Viking legacy in modern culture is the growing interest in their role in the exploration of North America. In the past, Viking presence in the New World was often regarded as a footnote in history, overshadowed by later explorers like Christopher Columbus. However, with the rediscovery of archaeological sites like Lonso Meadows and the renewed interest in Viking sagas, modern culture has begun to recognize the significance of the Vikings' first journeys to the Americas. These voyages were far more than mere accidents of history. They were groundbreaking moments that opened the door to further exploration and shaped the future of European exploration in the New World. In addition to popular media, the fascination with Vikings is also reflected in modern archaeology and history. As we learn more about Viking exploration in North America, new generations are becoming aware of the Vikings as the original explorers of the New World. Far before Columbus set sail, schools, museums, and historical sites around the world are increasingly focusing on Viking history, helping to bring their voyages into the mainstream consciousness. For example, the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo, Norway, is dedicated to preserving and celebrating the Viking maritime legacy, providing visitors with a deeper understanding of Viking shipbuilding, navigation, and exploration. Moreover, Viking influence can be seen in various modern languages, particularly in English and Scandinavian languages. Many of the words and phrases we use today can be traced back to Viking roots. The Vikings, through their conquests and interactions, helped shape the development of the English language, especially in terms of vocabulary and grammar. Modern Scandinavian cultures also take pride in their Viking heritage, celebrating it as a symbol of strength, resilience, and independence. The Viking fascination isn't just about the historical or archaeological significance, though it's also about the archetype of the Viking explorer and warrior. Today's explorers, adventurers, and even athletes often find themselves drawn to the Viking image. Many sports teams, such as the Minnesota Vikings and the NFL, have adopted Viking symbols and imagery to reflect strength, courage, and determination. Similarly, adventure tourism, including Viking reenactment festivals and Viking-themed cruises, has become a popular way for people to connect with the Viking past and experience a taste of their daring voyages. In the world of literature, Viking sagas continue to inspire modern-day writers. Authors like J.R.R. Tolkien, who created The Lord of the Rings, were influenced by Viking mythology and Norse sagas, incorporating their themes of heroism, struggle, and fate into epic narratives. Additionally, contemporary writers and historians continue to explore Viking history in new books, documentaries, and articles, shedding light on their role as explorers of the unknown. Their story is far from over, as their voyages continue to inspire creativity and reflection on human ambition and the drive to explore beyond the horizon. As you drift deeper into your sleep, consider how the Viking spirit of exploration lives on in the stories we tell today. From the pages of history books to the screen of your favorite shows, the Vikings have left a legacy that continues to shape our imagination. Their adventures, their bravery, and their ability to venture into the unknown still resonate with us. And while they may have left the shores of North America long ago, their legacy will continue to be celebrated for generations, reminding us of the power of exploration, discovery, and the relentless pursuit of the unknown. The Vikings' far-reaching explorations, although long overshadowed by later events like Columbus' journey to the Americas, set the stage for future voyages and established an enduring influence on the way the world saw navigation, trade, and cultural exchange. Their pioneering spirit and their desire to explore the unknown are still felt today in modern exploration and global connections. The legacy of Viking exploration goes far beyond their brief time in North America, played a key role in shaping how Europe and the rest of the world would eventually come together through trade, colonization, and exploration. The Vikings' exceptional maritime skills were central to their success in exploring vast distances, and these skills left a lasting imprint on global exploration. Their longships, designed for both deep-sea travel and navigating shallow rivers, were revolutionary in their time. These ships enabled the Vikings to reach distant lands, including the British Isles, Iceland, Greenland, and even parts of North America. Their ability to navigate with precision, often using the stars and natural landmarks, laid the foundation for more advanced navigation techniques in the centuries that followed. In the centuries after the Vikings, maritime exploration became a defining feature of European history. The Vikings' voyages helped ignite a sense of curiosity about the world beyond Europe, one that was later embraced by explorers like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan. While Columbus's 1492 voyage is often credited with discovering the Americas, it's important to remember that the Vikings had already set sail to the New World almost 500 years earlier. Their voyages not only demonstrated the feasibility of crossing the Atlantic, but also highlighted the potential of the New World, sparking an interest that would eventually lead to the widespread European exploration of the Americas. Additionally, the Vikings' trade networks connected far-flung regions of the world. They established trade routes that stretched from North America to the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and even Asia. Their trading practices and interactions with various cultures introduced new goods, ideas, and technologies across continents. The Vikings exchanged valuable resources such as furs, timber, and iron with people from different parts of the world, forging connections that would become increasingly important as global trade flourished in the centuries to come. The Vikings were among the first to create a form of globalization, linking the East and West through their extensive trade routes. The Vikings' influence on modern exploration extends beyond just maritime pursuits. It also shaped how we think about cultural exchange and understanding. In the Viking Age, cultural exchanges were not limited to trade goods, but also included ideas, technologies, and even languages. The Vikings, through their raids, settlements, and trade, interacted with numerous cultures, including the Celts, Anglo-Saxons, and even the Byzantine Empire. These encounters influenced Viking society and left lasting imprints on the cultures they encountered. One key example of this cultural exchange is the impact of Viking technology on later exploration. The Vikings were skilled craftsmen, and their shipbuilding techniques were considered highly advanced. Their longships were not only effective for exploration, but also crucial for their ability to travel to remote regions and engage in trade. This expertise would later be adopted and refined by other European explorers, facilitating the great waves of exploration that defined the Renaissance. Even today, the legacy of Viking exploration can be seen in modern voyages of discovery. The spirit of adventure and the desire to push boundaries embodied by the Vikings lives on in today. As explorers, whether they are astronauts exploring space or adventurers navigating remote regions of the Earth. The Viking Age was a time of constant pushing beyond the known world, and that same drive for discovery continues to inspire people today to seek out new frontiers. As you relax into a peaceful sleep, think of the Viking explorers setting out once again from their homelands. Their longships cutting through the waves as they journeyed to unknown lands. Their contributions to exploration and global connection were immense. And the world today is still shaped by their curiosity, bravery, and spirit of adventure. The Vikings may have sailed away from the shores of North America long ago, but their influence on modern exploration, global trade, and cultural exchange remains a testament to their lasting legacy. The Vikings, though often remembered for their fearsome raids and fierce warriors, have become far more than just historical figures in the collective imagination. Their cultural impact has transformed them into larger-than-life characters, heroes, villains, and gods woven into myths and legends that transcend time and place. Today, their stories continue to captivate our imaginations, and their legacy plays a significant role in shaping the way we view the past, adventure, and the unknown. The Vikings' influence is far-reaching, resonating through modern literature, films, television shows, and even popular symbolism. Part of the enduring mystique of the Vikings lies in their mythical and legendary status. Over the centuries, their real-life feats of exploration, trade, and warfare have been expanded upon, adding layers of mythology and storytelling that make them more captivating to modern audiences. Norse gods like Odin, Thor, and Loki have become iconic figures in pop culture through comics, movies, and television shows. The Vikings, who once traversed the seas in search of new lands, are now the subjects of fictionalized accounts and myths that emphasize their adventurous and heroic nature. One of the reasons the Viking legacy is so enduring is the blend of fact and fiction in their stories. The historical Vikings, explorers, and traders were undeniably remarkable. But over time, their exploits were embellished into epic sagas that combine elements of fantasy and mythology. These stories tell of brave warriors who sail across the oceans on ships with dragon-headed prows, battle fearsome monsters, and engage in grand quests. These exaggerated tales of heroism and destiny, mixed with actual historical events, have created a mythic narrative that continues to captivate modern audiences. Television series such as Vikings and The Last Kingdom, as well as films like Thor and the Avengers, have brought Viking stories to the forefront of popular culture. The television show Vikings is particularly notable for blending historical events with mythological themes. The show follows Ragnar Lothbrok, one of the most famous Viking kings, as he embarks on incredible adventures. Though the show takes significant creative liberties, it has introduced modern viewers to Viking values of courage, loyalty, and resilience while showcasing their legendary journeys and interactions with other cultures. The story of the Vikings' journey to North America is another example of the mythology surrounding their exploration. The idea of brave, intrepid Norsemen crossing the vast, stormy Atlantic Ocean to reach the shores of North America is fascinating in itself. But it is through the saga stories of gods, spirits, epic battles, that the Vikings' voyages are elevated from mere historical fact to heroic larger-than-life adventures. Leif Erikson's journey to Vinland, for example, is not only a historical event, but a tale of destiny and exploration. It's a story that has been romanticized over time, turning the Vikings into figures of myth and legend. The Vikings have also become symbols of strength and independence in modern culture. Their ability to navigate uncharted waters and expand their horizons has made them enduring symbols of exploration and the courage to face the unknown. In modern times, we see Viking imagery in sports teams, advertisements, and even video games. Teams like the Minnesota Vikings use the Viking motif to evoke a sense of power and competitiveness, while video games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla allow players to immerse themselves in Viking-inspired worlds where they can live out the thrilling exploits of Viking warriors. Furthermore, Viking symbols such as the Hammer of Thor, the Valkenota symbol associated with the afterlife, and runes have taken on a life of their own. These symbols are used not only by people interested in Viking history, but also by modern-day movements and subcultures. Some groups, seeking to reclaim Viking heritage or symbolically represent their own strength, use these symbols in their personal or public expression. Viking mythology has also inspired an entire genre of fantasy literature, most notably works like J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien himself was heavily influenced by Norse mythology and Viking tales. The elves, dwarves, and other mythical beings in his stories are based on the creatures found in Viking sagas, while the concept of a noble warrior-led society recalls the Vikings' own valorous traditions. As you drift into a peaceful slumber, picture the stories of Viking warriors sailing across stormy seas, facing gods and monsters, and embarking on grand quests. Their tales continue to echo through time, inspiring artists, explorers, and dreamers alike. The Vikings' legacy, both real and mythological, lives on in the world today, reminding us that the spirit of exploration, bravery, and adventure transcends time, and that the allure of the unknown is a universal part of the human experience. The Viking legacy isn't just confined to their exploration of North America. The Norsemen's impact was felt across vast parts of the world, from the British Isles to the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and even Russia. The Vikings left a significant mark wherever they traveled. Known for their formidable raiding, trading, and exploration, the Vikings formed settlements, built empires, and engaged in complex cultural exchanges. The Vikings didn't just conquer lands, they shaped the cultures they touched, blending their traditions with those of other civilizations and leaving a lasting imprint on the world. The Viking diaspora began in the 8th century and lasted through the 11th century. Vikings originally from Scandinavia, modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, set sail across Europe, first as raiders and later as traders, settlers, and explorers. They used their advanced shipbuilding techniques to navigate rivers, coasts, and even open seas, reaching regions far from their Scandinavian homeland. The Vikings were not only warriors, but also skilled merchants, farmers, and sailors, with a deep understanding of the seas that allowed them to travel great distances and create extensive networks of influence. One of the most well-known Viking settlements was in the British Isles, where the Vikings established the Danelaw in England and controlled large portions of Ireland and Scotland. These Viking territories were marked by their own unique legal systems, trade practices, and cultural influences. In particular, Viking England saw the establishment of towns such as York-Jorvik, which became one of the most powerful Viking cities in Europe during the 9th and 10th centuries. Here, the Vikings established their rule, built fortresses, and created a thriving economy based on trade, agriculture, and craftsmanship. The Viking presence in Ireland also had a profound impact. Norsemen established settlements in Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick, turning them into important centers of commerce and culture. The Vikings in Ireland were instrumental in shaping the political landscape, particularly through their involvement in the Irish kingdoms. These settlements became melting pots of Norse and Celtic culture, influencing the development of Ireland's cities and expanding its connections with the rest of Europe. The Vikings also left their mark on the Isle of Man, the Orkney Islands, and the Shetland Islands, where they established thriving colonies and integrated with the local populations. In these places, Viking traditions of shipbuilding, governance, and art blended with local customs, creating a unique hybrid culture that still influences these regions today. Beyond the British Isles, the Vikings expanded their influence into mainland Europe. In what is now France, they established the Duchy of Normandy in the 10th century, a region that would later become one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. The Viking leader Rollo, who became the first Duke of Normandy, was granted land by the French king in exchange for his loyalty and military support. Over time, the Normans would rise to power, with one of their most famous descendants, William the Conqueror, going on to become the King of England in 1066. This marked the beginning of the Norman influence in European history, which would shape the course of medieval Europe. The Vikings also ventured as far east as Russia, where they played a key role in the formation of the Kievan Rus, an early East Slavic state. Known as the Varangians in the east, the Vikings traveled along the Dnieper and Volga rivers, establishing trade routes and forging alliances with local Slavic tribes. The Varangians were crucial in the development of the Kievan Rus and were integral in the establishment of the Russian monarchy. Viking influence in the region can still be seen in Russian history and culture today. In the Mediterranean, the Vikings established trade links with the Byzantine Empire and even engaged in piracy and raiding along the coasts of modern-day Turkey, Italy, and Spain. Their ships allowed them to reach distant lands, and their advanced maritime skills made them formidable opponents to Mediterranean powers. Some Vikings, such as the Varangian Guard, even served as mercenaries in the Byzantine Empire, providing military service in exchange for wealth and land. The Vikings' impact was also felt in the Middle East. Through trade, the Vikings connected Europe with the Islamic world, exchanging goods such as furs, timber, and weapons for silver, spices, and textiles. Viking merchants traveled along the famous Silk Road, connecting northern Europe to the vast trade networks that spanned Asia and the Middle East. These interactions helped to create a more interconnected world, paving the way for the later age of exploration. Today, the legacy of the Viking diaspora can be seen in many parts of the world. The Vikings helped shape the history, culture, and economies of the places they settled and traded with. Their influence is still felt in the names of places, languages, and even customs. From the streets of York to the rivers of Russia, from the shores of Normandy to the fjords of Norway, the Vikings left their mark on the world, a legacy that continues to shape modern history. As you drift into sleep, imagine the Viking longships sailing across the seas, their sails billowing in the wind as they travel from one land to another. From England to the Mediterranean, from Russia to the Americas. The Vikings' reach was vast and their influence enduring. Their voyages not only shaped the world in their time, but also laid the foundation for the global connections that define our world today. While Viking society is often remembered for its fierce warriors and seafaring explorers, one aspect that often goes underappreciated is the significant role that women played in Viking culture. Women in Viking society were not only responsible for the domestic duties of the home, but also held positions of power, influence, and respect. Their roles varied greatly depending on their social status, but Viking women were far from passive bystanders in the history of their people. In Viking culture, women had more freedom and autonomy compared to many other societies of the time. They were responsible for managing households and overseeing the well-being of their families, often overseeing the production of food, textiles, and other necessary goods. Women's contributions to Viking daily life were vital for the survival of their communities. As they were central to the economic and social structure of Viking society, the most important role of Viking women was as the matriarchs of their households. While Viking men went off to raid, trade, or explore, women were often left behind to manage the home. Women could inherit property, make legal decisions, and engage in trade, which was not the case in many other cultures at the time. They could also represent their husbands in legal matters if necessary. This autonomy in matters of property and legal standing shows that Viking women were not subjugated in the way that women in many other medieval societies were. Viking women were also responsible for the continuation of Viking traditions and beliefs. They were central figures in religious and ceremonial practices. Norse mythology tells of powerful goddesses like Freya and Frigg, who were associated with love, fertility, and war, reflecting the important role of women in Viking belief systems. Women in Viking society were not just caretakers of the hearth. They were also seen as protectors of family and lineage, the power to influence their family's fates through their actions and decisions. One of the most fascinating aspects of Viking women's roles was their involvement in warfare and battle. though less common. There is historical evidence that some Viking women participated in combat. The existence of female warriors, or shield maidens, has been the subject of much fascination and debate. These women, who fought alongside Viking men, are often romanticized in sagas and modern retellings of Viking history. While evidence for shield maidens is limited, there are references in sagas to women who took up arms and fought in battle. In some instances, they are described as leaders in raids or battles, showing that women had the capacity to take on leadership roles in times of war. Additionally, Viking women were often integral to Viking exploration. When Viking men set out on their voyages, they left their wives and families behind to manage the homesteads and oversee daily affairs. However, women were also responsible for supporting the explorations by maintaining the farms that fed the growing Viking communities. The Viking diaspora, which spread across Europe and even to the Americas, relied heavily on the women left behind to ensure that settlements thrived and survived. Their endurance and adaptability were key to the Vikings' success as a seafaring and colonizing people. Archaeological evidence further sheds light on the role of women in Viking society. In some Viking burial sites, archaeologists have discovered weapons, armor, and tools buried with women, suggesting that these women may have been warriors or had important social and spiritual roles. The famous discovery of the Viking warrior woman in Birka, Sweden, revealed a tomb containing both weapons and items that would have been associated with a high-ranking individual. This discovery sparked debates about the role of women in Viking warfare and leadership. While it's not clear whether women like these were typical warriors, the presence of such items in their graves indicates a more complex and nuanced role for women in Viking culture than many previously assumed. Furthermore, Viking women were instrumental in maintaining the cultural identity of their people. They were the primary storytellers and keepers of Viking traditions. Through oral history, women passed down the sagas of their ancestors, ensuring that the epic tales of warriors, gods, and exploration were preserved for future generations. The influence of women as oral historians and preservers of Viking culture cannot be underestimated, as these stories became foundational to the identity of the Norse people. In modern times, the role of Viking women has been revisited, with more focus placed on their power and influence. Recent scholarship has challenged the traditional narrative of Viking women as mere bystanders in the Viking Age. By recognizing the contributions of Viking women in warfare, politics, and culture, historians are painting a fuller picture of Viking society, one in which women were not only essential to the survival of the community, but also played an active role in shaping its history. As you fall into a peaceful slumber, imagine the strong women of Viking society, their hands weaving fabric, managing households, and maintaining their families while their men set sail for distant lands. Picture the shield maidens, brave and fierce, standing side by side with their male counterparts, ready to fight for their people. The Vikings were a society in which men and women both played vital roles, and their legacy lives on in the stories and sagas that continue to captivate us today. While the Vikings are often remembered for their fearsome raids and explorations, another vital aspect of their culture was their extensive trade networks. The Vikings were not only warriors and explorers, they were also skilled traders who established complex trade routes that connected parts of Europe, the Middle East, and even Asia. These trade routes helped shape the medieval world by facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures across vast distances, making the Vikings an integral part of a global network that spanned continents. The Vikings' trade routes extended from their homelands in Scandinavia to distant lands, including modern-day Russia, the British Isles, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. Their primary means of transportation was their iconic longship, which allowed them to travel across both open seas and shallow rivers, giving them access to regions that other cultures could not easily reach. Viking traders were able to carry goods across thousands of miles, creating a network that brought together diverse cultures and regions. One of the most significant Viking trade routes was the route that ran through Russia, known as the Varangian trade route. This route connected the Viking world in Scandinavia with the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. The Vikings, known as the Varangians in Eastern Europe, traveled along the rivers of Russia, such as the Volga and Dnieper rivers, to trade with the Slavic peoples, the Byzantine Empire, and the Muslim world. They traded goods such as furs, timber, and iron for luxury items like silk, spices, and silver. This trade route not only connected the Vikings with the East, but also facilitated the exchange of technologies and ideas between the East and West. In addition to the Varangian trade route, the Vikings also established trade networks with the British Isles, where they traded goods such as wool, amber, and metalwork. In the early Viking raids on the British Isles, the Vikings primarily sought to plunder and acquire wealth. But over time, they shifted to trade as they established settlements in places like York, Jorvik, Dublin, and other key Viking-controlled cities. These cities became important centers for commerce, where Viking merchants exchanged their goods with Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, and Frankish traders. The Vikings' trade with the Mediterranean world was also significant. Their ships enabled them to travel across the Mediterranean Sea, where they engaged in trade with the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic Caliphates, and other Mediterranean civilizations. The Vikings traded a wide variety of goods, including furs, walrus ivory, and slaves. For products such as glassware, jewelry, and silver coins, one of the most notable Viking trade products was walrus ivory, which was highly prized in the Mediterranean for its use in making luxury items such as combs, chess pieces, and carvings. The Vikings' interaction with the Byzantine Empire is particularly interesting because it led to the formation of the Varangian Guard, an elite group of Viking mercenaries who served as bodyguards for the Byzantine emperors. The Vikings' reputation as fierce warriors made them highly sought after as soldiers, and many Vikings traveled to Constantinople to serve in the Byzantine army. The Varangian Guard was renowned for its loyalty and effectiveness in battle, and their service to the Byzantine Empire is a testament to the Vikings' global reach and their ability to establish relationships far from their homeland. In the Middle East, Viking traders also had a significant impact. The Vikings' raids and trading activities brought them into contact with the Islamic Caliphates, where they exchanged goods and ideas. Vikings traded items like furs and weapons in exchange for silver, textiles, and spices. This exchange not only benefited both sides economically, but also facilitated cultural exchanges. The Vikings introduced new goods and technologies to the Islamic world, while also learning from the advanced cultures of the Middle East. The Vikings' trade routes were not just about material goods, they also facilitated the spread of ideas and innovations. As the Vikings traveled from one region to another, they encountered new technologies, art forms, and cultural practices, which they often incorporated into their own society. For example, Viking artisans were influenced by the art and craftsmanship of the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world, which can be seen in the intricate designs on Viking metalwork and jewelry. The Vikings' extensive trading network helped to spread innovations such as Arabic numerals and the use of advanced textiles, which were later adopted by Viking societies. The Vikings' ability to build and maintain such vast and intricate trade networks is one of the key factors in their success as a seafaring and trading culture. Their trade routes connected diverse regions and peoples, creating a melting pot of ideas, goods, and technologies that shaped the medieval world. The Vikings were not only known for their raids and conquests, but also for their role in creating a connected world that spanned from the icy shores of Scandinavia to the warm sands of the Middle East. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the bustling Viking trading hubs filled with merchants from all corners of the world. Picture the long ships laden with goods, sailing across rivers and seas to bring furs, spices, and silver to far-off lands. The Vikings' trade routes were not just about commerce, they were the lifeblood of a global network that brought cultures together, creating connections that still resonate in the world today. The Viking Age was not only a period of exploration and warfare, it was also a time of expansion and settlement. Vikings didn't just raid and conquer, they built lasting settlements in the regions they explored, leaving a cultural, economic, and political legacy that endures even today. Their expansion was widespread, reaching from the British Isles to the far reaches of Russia, and even into the Mediterranean. These settlements, whether temporary or long-lasting, were crucial in spreading Viking culture, technology, and influence throughout Europe and beyond. The Viking presence in the British Isles is one of the most significant examples of their settlement efforts. After initially raiding monasteries and towns along the coasts of England, Scotland, and Ireland, the Vikings eventually began to settle and establish their own communities. One of the most famous Viking settlements was in York, known as Jorvik, during the Viking Age, founded around 866 AD. Jorvik became one of the most important cities in Viking-controlled England. It served as a major trading hub and was a center of Viking culture where Norse and Anglo-Saxon traditions merged. The city's archaeological site today reveals remnants of Viking life, including houses, streets, and a wealth of artifacts, offering a glimpse into what life was like for the Vikings who made it their home. In Ireland, the Vikings established settlements in Dublin, Limerick, and Waterford. These towns became thriving centers of trade and commerce, where Vikings exchanged goods like furs, timber, and metalwork for silver, spices, and luxury items. Over time, the Vikings and the native Irish people began to intermarry and integrate, creating a unique blend of Norse and Celtic culture. The Vikings' presence in Ireland was so impactful that even today you can find evidence of Viking influence in Irish place names, language, and mythology. The Vikings didn't stop at the British Isles and Ireland, expanded eastward into what is now Russia, where they played a key role in the formation of the Kievan Rus, one of the earliest East Slavic states. The Varangians, as the Vikings were known in the east, traveled along the Dnieper and Volga rivers, trading and establishing settlements along the way. In doing so, they helped establish important trade routes connecting the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea and the Byzantine Empire. Their interactions with the Slavic tribes in the region led to the development of a powerful new kingdom, with Viking rulers such as Rurik and Oleg becoming central figures in the history of Russia. The Vikings also established settlements in the North Atlantic, most notably in Greenland and Iceland. Eric the Red, a legendary Viking explorer, founded the first Norse settlement in Greenland around 985 AD. Greenland, with its harsh environment, posed a significant challenge for Viking settlers. Yet, despite the difficulties, the Norse managed to establish two colonies, the Eastern Settlement and the Western Settlement. These colonies survived for several centuries, largely based on farming, hunting, and trade with Europe. In Iceland, another Viking settlement, the Icelanders created a unique society that valued law and governance, which is exemplified in the Icelandic Althing, one of the oldest parliaments in the world. The Vikings didn't just settle in regions they conquered, they transformed them. In the lands they settled, they brought their customs, language, and ways of life. In Ireland and Scotland, for example, Viking place names can still be found today, a lasting reminder of their presence. In the British Isles, Norsemen brought with them new farming techniques, and their advanced shipbuilding knowledge allowed for the expansion of trade and transportation. Viking influence can also be seen in the languages of the regions they occupied, particularly in England, where Old Norse contributed a significant number of words to the English language. One of the most remarkable aspects of Viking settlements was their ability to adapt to local conditions and integrate into the societies they encountered. While the Vikings were often seen as invaders, their legacy is one of cultural exchange and fusion. In many areas, the Vikings didn't merely conquer, they coexisted and contributed to the development of the regions they settled. This ability to blend their Norse traditions with the customs of other peoples was key to the Vikings' long-lasting influence in Europe and beyond. The settlements in North America, particularly in Newfoundland, marked the farthest reach of Viking expansion. Though the Vikings were unable to establish a permanent colony in Vinland, their brief settlement in the New World remains one of the most fascinating chapters in the story of Viking expansion. The discovery of Lanso Meadows in the 1960s provided solid evidence that the Vikings were the first Europeans to set foot in North America, centuries before Columbus. This discovery not only confirmed the Vikings' remarkable ability to explore and settle distant lands, but also highlighted their role in the early history of the Americas. As you drift into sleep, think of the Vikings settling in far-flung corners of the world. From the cold waters of the North Atlantic to the fertile plains of England and the vast forests of Russia, imagine their longships landing on foreign shores, bringing with them their culture, technology, and ideas. The Vikings were not just raiders, they were settlers, traders, and builders of societies. Their influence continues to shape the world in ways we may not even fully realize, and their legacy lives on in the places they touched, the people they met, and the stories they left behind. The Vikings, though they lived over 1,000 years ago, continued to capture the human imagination. Their story is one of bold exploration, unyielding bravery, and a relentless drive to push the boundaries of the known world. Whether through their raids, their voyages of discovery, or their trading expeditions, the Vikings embodied a spirit of adventure that resonates today. This sense of daring and discovery continues to inspire explorers, adventurers, and dreamers around the world, reminding us that there is always something beyond the horizon waiting to be discovered. The Viking Age may have ended around the 11th century, but the legacy they left behind continues to shape the world in profound ways. Their exploration of distant lands, from the icy shores of Greenland to the sun-drenched coasts of the Mediterranean, opened up new frontiers and changed the course of history. The Vikings were pioneers who were unafraid to venture into the unknown. In doing so, they laid the groundwork for future generations of explorers who would expand the horizons of the Western world. Their voyages to North America, while brief, are particularly significant. The Vikings were the first known Europeans to set foot in the Americas, centuries before Columbus. Though they didn't establish lasting settlements, their journey to Vinland proved that the New World was reachable by sea and set the stage for the age of European exploration that would follow. In many ways, the Vikings were ahead of their time, not only in their maritime technology, but also in their vision of a world beyond their shores. But the Viking spirit wasn't just about exploration. It was about resilience, adaptation, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. When the Vikings set sail, they faced dangers like fierce storms, unknown lands, and hostile peoples. Yet, they pressed forward, undeterred by the challenges that lay ahead. This attitude of never backing down in the face of adversity is what made the Vikings such a remarkable civilization and why their legacy endures. In modern culture, the Viking ethos lives on. From blockbuster movies and television shows to video games and literature, the image of the Viking has evolved into a symbol of strength, courage, and adventure. Films like Vikings and Thor have brought Viking mythology and history to the forefront, making their stories accessible to new generations. The Vikings' belief in fate, heroism, destiny resonates deeply with modern audiences who admire their boldness and their refusal to be constrained by the world around them. Moreover, the Viking ethos of exploration and discovery continues to inspire those who seek to explore the unknown. Whether it's adventurers pushing the boundaries of space exploration, travelers setting off to discover new cultures, or innovators creating groundbreaking technologies, the spirit of the Vikings is alive in the people who venture into uncharted territories. Just as the Vikings once sailed across the uncharted seas, modern explorers are charting new frontiers, from the deep ocean to the farthest reaches of space. The Vikings also remind us of the importance of cultural exchange. Their trade networks connected distant lands and brought together people from different cultures. The Vikings didn't just conquer, they built relationships, traded goods, and exchanged ideas. They contributed to the development of new societies and cultures, blending their own traditions with those of the people they encountered. In this way, they helped create a more interconnected world, one that was shaped by cooperation, conflict, and mutual respect. The legacy of the Vikings is not just one of conquest and exploration, but of cultural exchange, resilience, and an enduring sense of adventure. Their voyages and settlements were a testament to the human desire to discover what lies beyond the horizon and to build a world of connections both near and far. Their achievements remind us that exploration is not just about finding new lands, it's about discovering new ways to see the world, to connect with others, and to create something lasting and meaningful. As you drift into sleep, think of the Vikings setting sail once more, their longships cutting through the waves as they journey toward new horizons. Their voyages may have ended long ago, but the spirit of adventure, discovery, and resilience they embodied continues to inspire people today. The Vikings may have been the first Europeans to cross the ocean to North America, but their legacy is much larger than that. It's a call to explore, to dream, and to never stop seeking the unknown.